Hello, welcome to El Partido, yet another Spanish football podcast. Now, let me tell you for free, if you're here to learn more about XG, or if you don't know who Juan Pablo Sorin is, this is not the podcast for you. This is all about going down memory lane, back to the years of Revista de la Liga, with myself, Nick Bell, and my wonderful co-host, Paul McGarry. How are you?
I'm very good, Nick. Very good. Glad to be here.
Yes, exactly. This has been a long time coming. It's been something I've been wanting to do for a while. I listen to a lot of Spanish football podcasts, probably like yourself, Paul, and there's a very limited amount of looking back with Spanish football, I find. I don't know, with the podcast you listen to, that you find that there is nobody talking about Pablo Aimar or talking about Samuel Eto'o playing for Mallorca. There seems to be a distinct lack of it in my life.
Yeah, there is. There's a big gap to be filled, isn't there? I think
there is huge shoes to be filled, which should be quite good. And I even decided to dress retro tonight in a 2001 Malaga Umbro training jacket, and I thought I looked quite fetching whilst doing so. So I suppose we best explain a bit about who we are and what we do. To start with, Paul. So I'll ask you first. I know you've been in the podcasting world for a long time. You've had a lot of exposure on different channels. Do you want to tell us where you've come from and what you're up to nowadays?
Yeah. So I suppose you're right. Yeah, I've been around quite a bit. Spent 6.5 years as the senior writer for Spanish football at the Over the Bar website. I've been on the Spanish Segundo show more recently, doing interviews with fans. I've been, here and there. I've in the past been on the Real Football Cast with Dan Tracy. Been on a couple of episodes of La Liga Lowdown, and been around the block a bit. We've obviously worked together in the past, as well as people know, when we did the Glastonbury of Spanish football a couple of years ago with stellar lineups, and that was the 15-hour live stream that brought a lot of content creators together for a good cause.
Yeah, the Stand Up for Ukraine, where we kind of brought back maybe the, if you've got an inspiration for your show, Revista de la Liga is probably definitely up there as far as I'm concerned. So we had like Guillem Valle and Scott Minto and Roberto Martinez involved. I know we had Over the Bar represented GiriCast, which is one of my podcasts as well, for a dedicated Malaga fan podcast. So just a really cool day, that's for definite. But it sounds like that we've managed to secure quite the coup of a signing for El Partido's debut, which is quite good. And hopefully moving forward as well, if all things go well, if people want to learn more about, like, say, that Spanish nostalgia trip. You've got a Spanish team as well, Paul, if I remember rightly?
Yeah, I'm a Real Mallorca fan. And you know what? It's nice. It's there's ups and downs, but it's kind of one of those teams that I just enjoy watching without feeling any kind of need to throw anything at the TV at the moment. Been different in the past, but but it's nice at the moment. We've got a good thing going.
Say again, sorry?
We've got a good thing going at the moment, so
yeah, definitely, it's looking quite positive for Mallorca at the moment, isn't it? Like you say, there's an onward view. The stadium is looking incredible as well nowadays. Really fit for purpose. And I remember rightly that there was once a danger that if depending on who was higher up in the league at the time between Real Mallorca and Atletico Baleares, they'd get like the keys to San Juan. I don't think that's going to be a problem for a little while, considering there's now like 4 divisions between the two of you, is there?
It's a big gap, isn't it? Yeah, a very big gap. And it's quite nice to have people talk about the fact that there's not just one team on the island. It's good. There's Andrach as well, who had a good Copa del Rey run a few years ago as well. So yeah, nice little part of the world.
Yeah, the Balearics is bustling with football as well. Ibiza at the moment are absolutely smashing it, and I do another podcast as well called El Porto, which is the Primera Ref show, and it's great to see how Bebe is just scoring for fun at the moment against someone else. I'm sure we'll talk about on this podcast, but I suppose we best tell everybody sort of like why we're here, and it's as I kind of said in the intro, Paul. There isn't many people talking about sort of like the stories. You do get some. Flashbacks, and you get some accounts on Instagram that maybe say, "Hey, remember when this happened?" That's great, but there isn't really a podcast for it. And the one we're going to talk about today is I think really cool, because we're going all the way back to 2001. We're talking about Rafael Benitez in at Valencia at a time when Valencia, you look at them now and the battling relegation in La Liga, troubles off the pitch. Back then the stadium was up and ready to go type of thing with the new Mestalla. It was a plan on paper which was happening next year. Nowadays, not so much. So we're going to look a bit back at their glory days, aren't we? And I suppose I best ask you, what do you know too much about the pre-Rafa era? Because obviously Valencia didn't just come out of nowhere. They're a massive club in Spain, aren't they?
They are, yeah, one of the original clubs that play at one of, perhaps, maybe, depending on your opinion, one of the most impressive of the old stadiums in the Iberian Peninsula. Yeah, a lot of history, and it comes at a time where it's the turn of millennium. They've had Cooper, they've had Ranieri as well. It was a real hot spot for tempers as well, on and off the pitch, in that part of the world. It's a very rich city, isn't it? Very picturesque. But I would say that what we're going to be looking at here is a period of maybe the golden age from a football perspective for the club.
Yeah, I think, when you look at the way that they were batting at this period of time, everything that they touched sort of turned to gold, didn't they? And I must agree with you. I was in Valencia this weekend just for the day, and I went to Mestalla, and honestly, it is bucket list stuff, and I do implore anyone, whilst it's still here, because the new Mestalla, which has been in progress for about 16 years, apparently is going to get finished just in time for the Spanish, Portuguese and Moroccan World Cup, and Uruguayan and Paraguayan and Argentinian, all those teams that are going to be hosting it. It was incredible. And, even at kind of like it's half its ebb that it's at now, it still had a wonderful energy to it and a really passionate fan base and things like that. And if I could put my magic clock on and, be Bernard's watch, whatever it might be, and go back in time to watch, Valencia at their pomp under Rafa Benitez at the turn of millennium, it would have been absolutely brilliant. You mentioned Claudio Ranieri as well, because, like you said, this kind of started with maybe just a little bit before him with Luis Aragonés, I think it was, just before him. And then Claudio Ranieri came in, sort of like shook it up a little bit. He won the Copa del Rey, which was their first bit of silverware for a while, if I remember rightly, Paul.
Yeah, it was a couple of decades, wasn't it? Really? I should
yeah.
know that right now, but yeah.
they were in the Barons, weren't they? A little bit, like you say.
Yeah.
They were brought back to the forefront as a bit of a footballing force in Spain, which has been dominated by, your Real Madrids and your Barcelonas and such for donkey's years. And then along comes Héctor Cooper, which I think is the way you say it. It's an Argentinian guy, so I'm going to throw in as many different accents as possible on this one. Do you know where he's managing now, Paul? Just as a sidebar.
National team, I'd guess. But he must be at the retirement one, so it's got to be like a part-time gig, hasn't it, really?
I think it could be the most part-time gig going, if I'm being perfectly honest. He's the Syria national team manager, which is a tough gig, is probably the way I would describe that right now.
Yeah, it's hard to think of many more difficult jobs, really, in the circumstances.
Yeah, I think he's done a bit of a tour after he finished with club football. I'm sure he's been, I want to say Egypt as well. He was there for a little while, quite recently. But yeah, a man who, whilst he was at Valencia, took them to back-to-back Champions League finals. So again, the fact that Ranieri had not only brought silverware to Mestalla. He got them back involved in the race for the Champions Leagues. This is when they were kind of really, hitting their stride. The likes of Claudio Lopez and guys like Mendieta, really pulling the strings for Valencia. And then all of a sudden, Hector is off. Mendieta is sold. Claudio Lopez is sold, both to Lazio, if I remember rightly. And it's looking like that little golden period is over or before it's even begun, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And it's important to sort of remember as well, this was a time where the Italian league was still very strong and the clubs had a lot of money. I think Mendieta went for 40 plus million, maybe 45 million, I think, in the old days, which is a lot of money now. So to think of it 25 years or so ago, it's quite significant. And obviously he was a wonderful player. Everybody talks about the goal that he scored in the Coppa as well in the Ranieri season on it. And rightly so. But yeah, it wasn't just that Valencia couldn't hold on to their best players. It was the fact that they were given a lot of money for players at the time that would still be a lot of money to some clubs now. And I think the frustration at the time maybe was that money wasn't reinvested in the playing staff as well.
Yeah, I think ultimately that's what broke the straw for a lot of managers' backs at Valencia. It was that they were producing, high caliber, world class footballers on the regular. Like I say, these two were the start of a long conveyor belt, which went way beyond Rafa Benitez as well. And let's not forget, it's only recently maybe been turned off, maybe going back, 5 or 6 years ago as a club. But that seemed to be it for Hector. He decided to go to Inter Milan again. That pull of Italy at the time. I don't know about you, Paul, but I was watching it on Channel 4. The name eludes me now. What the program was called?
Was it? It wasn't the Gazzetta, was it? It was Football Italia on Channel 4 with
Football Italia. That was it. Yeah. I can still remember vaguely the titles that it had, and like you say, you were seeing things like Gazzetta dello Sport and things like that in the UK at the time because Italian football was just the place to be.
Yeah, it was. And if you think about it as well, I mean, there was just going through the 90s. It carried on for basically a decade, didn't it? Italian 90 happened, and then there was players going over, and it wasn't just like one or two, and it was quite sustained. That meant that Italian football became quite embedded in British culture. It wasn't like I wouldn't say it was a hipster thing. It was more widespread than that, wasn't it? And you'd see early morning reviews of what was the presenter's name called, where he sat with the newspaper having a coffee, that you see a lot of people trying to emulate on social media nowadays as well, don't you? But, and it sold not just the product of the football, but the idea of there being this cool culture, and obviously the fact that those clubs had the money to spend as well meant it was very difficult for other clubs in Europe to say no to when an Italian club came calling, and certainly for players as well.
They were kind of the blueprint, weren't they, for what Italia was in the 90s. Really set the tone for what Spain became maybe in the noughties, especially around the Galacticos era, and the all-conquering Barcelona of Rijkaard and Pep Guardiola. Or even now, like you say, look at the power and the pull of the Premier League, you could say, well, that's where it all started, these marquee players, these big signings. So, there's a lot to be said about, it's one thing to keep hold of your players like Mendieta, like Claudio Lopez, but you can also see why they went. Football is a very short career, as we know, and especially back then, if the wages were being offered in Italy, it's not too far from Valencia to Rome, is it? So, it's probably not as much as a culture shock you would have thought, but essentially this led to a change at the top of Valencia. The chairman or the president ended up basically binning it off. He brought a new chairman in, and his task was to, where do I go from here? I've got a manager that I've lost, players that I've lost, that have got us to 2 back-to-back Champions League finals. Right, I'm going to go find the 2 or 3 top managers in this country to come to Valencia and to try and turn things around. And he firstly went for Javier Irureta, if I'm saying that right. So again, apologies on this. I'm from Lancashire, Paul. You're from Manchester, so there will be some butchering of the Spanish language. I don't know if you speak Spanish, actually, Paul. That might be a bit harsh on you.
I do, but I'm not the most proficient at it, let's say.
Yes, I know. I un poco for me. I can get by just about, but don't challenge me too much. But
Yeah.
if there is anything I say that is wildly outrageous, just give me an offside flag, and that'd be great.
There's no shaking off the Manc accent, so even when I do speak a bit of Spanish, you can still tell where I'm from.
No, me as well. Well, there was the chat from Dayport. We'll call him the chat from Dayport. There was Jose Mane and also Luis Aragonés, who all basically turned down the job because it looked like the high time was over for Los Che. It was like, you've won your Copa del Rey, you've been in 2 Champions League finals, you've lost your best players. It's now time to go backwards, and you've done your loop. So, at the manager at that time, I kind of don't disagree with them, because it must have been difficult to see how you can get Valencia back up and running again after that much change.
Yeah, it's a challenge for anyone coming in, and I think as well the almost making it in cup finals, in finals, and not succeeding whilst you've got a high turnover of players or something. It kind of makes you think, well, is it a challenge I want to take on? Is there something underlying there that might have put big names off? And obviously, the club were left to look elsewhere, weren't they?
They were, and they didn't manage to have to look too far. Well, I say not too far. They did have to look down to almost the equator to find a manager who would be willing to take the job. 4th choice at this point, but it was Senor Benitez. He was Tenerife manager at the time, or was just leaving Tenerife after a season where he got them promoted to La Liga. But I suppose before we jump into where he came from immediately, just to look back over Rafa Benitez as a person, for me, especially in the latter sort of 10 years, he's been deemed a bit of a comical figure, hasn't he, Paul? It's kind of like, Everton fans and Chelsea fans, even Real Madrid and latterly Celta in Spain, have sort of kind of like mocked that they've appointed Benitez, but he's a high caliber manager at the end of the day. He's a multiple trophy winner.
He is, and I think, to be fair, it might even go back a bit further than that. There's always kind of been a few remarks made about him that I've always felt were a bit disrespectful. I mean, it goes back to when he was at Liverpool, and after he maybe stayed there a little bit longer than perhaps he should have in terms of reputation, because by the end, there was a lot of stadiums where he was being called a fat Spanish waiter by which I thought I mean, that's obviously what some of the terrace culture can be like sometimes in England, but there was also his rant about facts, facts, Mr. Ferguson, where I think at that point people, certainly the press, maybe didn't take him as seriously as they used to, and it kind of just went from there. And then you had Mourinho. If you think about it, Mourinho had gone to Madrid, he'd gone to Chelsea, Madrid, Inter, and shortly after it, Benitez had followed him, and Mourinho made a few comments about, this guy just follows me around and takes my rejections, or something along those lines. So that there's a bit to it there, and obviously more recently, I think, maybe the last club that he went to where I'd say he was really popular with the fans might even be as far back as when he was at Newcastle, where they genuinely didn't want him to go.
Yeah, Newcastle stands out as one for me, where he had that sort of he got back to being that cult icon again, because you can't get away from his achievements and what he does, and the name that he is as well. And his look lends himself to that. And again, he's not a conventional manager who has been playing at the top of the game. For example, he spent much of his career at Real Madrid Castilla in the youth side. He then moved to Parla, which is sort of a little town just on the outskirts of southern Madrid. Kind of looks halfway to Toledo, if I remember rightly. Spent some time there before then going to the original Linares Club de Football. Retired at 26. So again, he's not somebody who's coming in with a CV that says, well, I've played for your Barcelonas, I've played for your other athletic clubs. He doesn't have that. So for him to get to that table, probably similarly like Mourinho as well, it was quite an age where you didn't have to be an ex-professional world superstar to be a manager like you had to be.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, obviously having your career cut short through injury as well, but that can be the making of some of the managers as well. And I mean, there was this theory not so long ago about certain managers who they've played it, but not at the highest level. They tend to be the ones who, because they've gone through a bit of failure or they've been up against it. That's been the making of them when it comes to coaching. And there might be something in that, and you know, I think people have said that about the likes of Jurgen Klopp as well, and you know it's how you react to it, and obviously people are different over the course of the years, but it can also be on the flip side of it, depending on what sort of dressing room you walk into as a manager. Some players might think, well, you've not won anything. Who are you to tell me I'm not running hard enough, or you know, I'm not passing the ball quick enough? It's a funny game, isn't it?
It is, and I think the good thing from Rafa's perspective is that, you know, there's a lot of footballers who would have retired at 26, you know, took that hit and didn't take it well either. Whereas I think he dusted himself down, took himself off to university, and got himself back involved with Real Madrid as well. Which again, from a starting standpoint as a manager, there's probably very few places that are better than being at the Ciudad Real Madrid as a coach at that time. And
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny though as well because his dad was an Atleti fan, but it was his
really,
dad who got him a trial when he was a youngster at Real Madrid. I mean, this is what I've took it. My source for this is a Sid Lowe article from 2009, actually.
oh,
So I'll assume that it's gospel, you know.
it's gospel.
But I do, you know, because obviously when we decided we were going to pick this as a subject, I got a bit nostalgic myself. Started watching some of the old footage and everything. But I also a few years ago I read Craig Bellamy's autobiography. It's on the shelf somewhere behind me anyway. And there's a chapter or two in there about his time at Liverpool. Specifically, he talks about Benitez and how he upset some of the players in the way that he originally introduced himself into the dressing room, but very quickly they started to appreciate him as a human as much as a coach.
Yeah.
But it's very clear that he became, I think he uses the word obsessive with like the small details. It's all the tactical stuff, and you know, he's somebody who from a young age would keep notes, and he'd have a notebook on tactics. You know, I mean, we all did that, didn't we? Really, when we were thinking, oh, you know. But he's you know he's obviously got like a back catalogue of notebooks of, you know, my Sunday league team, let's do this or whatever, and then he goes. He doesn't quite make it as a player. He like you say, he finishes his playing career and then takes it upon himself to go and study a bit more. I think he travels around Europe a little bit as well. He came to England, went to Italy, didn't he?
Yeah, we did. Yeah,
to try and cement his understanding not just of the game but of language as well. And the fact that he takes a lot of that experience, I think, going into different dressing rooms and being quite intense and focusing on the fine details. I mean, the small details, like him, you know, he banned paella, he banned ice cream, and he made players run twice as much as they previously did, and would devote some time during the week to just talk about tactics without practicing with a football at the feet, you know. And that is something, particularly if you read it in somebody like Craig Bellamy's book, that other players might see it differently, but it was one that that Liverpool squad, they didn't really appreciate in the beginning, but they quickly realised that it was having a positive effect on their performances. And I'm sure, you know, we'll get to it when it comes to the Valencia team and how they went about it. But I think you can see that in the majority of his clubs and their relative successes. Certainly his time at Inter, and even when he was he had that spell at Real Madrid as the first team coach, which was again after Mourinho. There's elements of his play that like that, and we're talking about a guy who had a very clear idea of how he wanted his team to play football from an early age, and it's carried it on. And even now, looking back on, and I don't want to skip too far ahead, but looking back at some of those highlights, I can see bits of the game there. I'm thinking, teams still do that now, or teams still do this now. Anyway, I've digressed a little bit there, so I'll hand it back to you.
I love a tangent as much as anybody, Paul. So I'm happy to go down this route with you, because I was going to say, dare we utter that if if Arsene Wenger hadn't come in to the Premier League first, and we obviously had Rafa Benitez as the first Spanish manager to come into England in the Premier League, he probably would have been revered in the exact same way as a game changer, because what he was doing tactically and the way he was with his methods, it's so far strung from, even some of the more successful, British managers we had through that time. So you can definitely see where the benefits were. And, the fact that he took Liverpool to a Champions League final, never mind won the thing, speaks volumes. He did that in his first couple of years as manager as well. But I think he takes a lot of that from his success and failures, like we were talking about before. He's someone who really uses that energy to bring himself back up again. And he didn't really have the perfect start to managerial life outside of Real Madrid. It's very easy maybe sometimes to be the Real Madrid youth manager because you've got a conveyor belt of talent coming through, or players that you've poached from different parts of the country or from abroad. He even got up to being Vicente Del Bosque's assistant manager for like 5 months at one point, which again shows his regard more than anything. But his first job outside of Madrid, he heads north to Real Valladolid. Very similar to this season, the way it's going under Ronaldo at the moment as president. He ends the year with, I think he only got something like 2 wins in 23 games or something like that. He's got Real Valladolid rock bottom of the league. And you just got to think then, right, well, you're done. If that was nowadays, you'd be done as a manager. You wouldn't get a second chance of the whip, would you?
No. And I think it's quite telling of the time as well. That doesn't happen now. Obviously, football's always been a results game, but I think certainly in the last 10 or 15 years, maybe the patience of chairman or directors of the board, etc., has got a bit thinner. But I think that's also the pressure now because of the commercialization in a way, and obviously what's at stake. You don't get chances like that. But I think as well that we could probably say, looking at it, that is another example where things not going great is actually an experience that Benitez learns from and sort of works to ensure that he doesn't fall into the same pitfalls again going forward, with the exception of the brief spell at Osasuna.
Yeah, he ended up at a redemption beckoned El Sadar for him, but it didn't quite work off. It only lasted 9 games, if I remember rightly, and just the one win in Pamplona. But for me, again, shows the mentality to bounce back, because after that I'd be thinking, maybe I'm not cracked out for this. Maybe I should be lecturing, or maybe I should be a youth coach, or maybe I should go into television or something. But he carried on going, and then he ended up. I suppose the silver lining of his time at Osasuna was he met with, and again, apologies for the pronunciation on this, Paco Ayestaran. I think I've got that one right.
Sounds right to me.
Sounds, as long as it sounds right. If you say it with confidence and you sound confident, it must sound right. Current assistant manager to Unai Emery at Aston Villa as well, who obviously the other night progressed past Club Brugge to the quarterfinals of Champions League. So his influence that could be another podcast in itself. But by meeting him there, he went on this journey with Rafa Benitez where they basically got their heads together and they just turned teams into winning machines. And I think it goes a lot into the fact that Paco was a fitness coach. So again, really bought into this, desiring and having the energy to press and to keep hold of the ball and be as fit as possible. We're talking rotation of players as well, which was, again, not a thing back then. You would just keep your 11 and substitute if somebody broke the leg. So when both of them ended up at Extremadura, which for people who don't know is a team very remotely based in the west of Spain, not far from the Portuguese border. When he got them promoted to La Liga, that was again a wow moment. How has he done this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's, and you know what as well? I think these, and we'll see it more as we talk about what's coming. He seems to have an instant impression where he goes. Mostly, for the first few clubs, obviously we've talked about it being not so much negative, but not going the way he wanted. But he certainly had an impression. and it felt like this is the point in his career now where things are really taking off, and to achieve that so quickly, it was maybe a bit of foreshadowing of how quickly his next big achievement comes around. It's credit to him, and again, is this us learning or him learning from past mistakes and adapting? It also talks to the obsessive that we referenced earlier as well.
Yeah, it is, and you can see that the fact that he got them to La Liga for only, I think, the second time in their history, if I remember rightly. Again, it's just about. I think they did yo-yo. To be fair, I think they're quite close together those years where Extremadura are in the Liga, but again, now look where Extremadura are. Way down the well again.
Yeah.
Which is obviously a very big shame to see. But he leaves Extremadura after finishing sort of, I think it was 17th in the Liga. He gets beaten in a playoff by Real Vallecano. He goes, right, well, I've probably taken as far as I can go. And again, that probably lends itself to before where you're thinking, well, it's actually quite unusual for him to have lasted at Liverpool for so long, because he is someone who is aware that he can be there for too long. He takes a bit of time off to do some television. So again, we see Rafa on the television a lot nowadays. It seems to be his second passion. He does a lot to do with the Euros and things like that. And ends up in Tenerife. And again, island team, the Helidoro is a hell of a place to go. Galvanizes them, makes them absolute runners. He turns Mistas into a world beater, and he gets them promoted to La Liga. And that's where the knock at the door comes, doesn't it, Paul?
Yeah, he does. Yeah, and it's worth mentioning what a really impressive job he did. If you think about finishing to third in the Segunda table, just 6 points behind the first place team, which was Sevilla, and 1 point behind second place Real Betis, and crucially ahead of Atletico Madrid, who finished fourth. Same number of points, but there was the goal swing back then. But to do that when, all right, Valencia, Tenerife are not one of the smallest clubs in the world. But they're no Sevilla, Betis, or Atletico, are they, in terms of competing? And I know it's a different era, but to do that in those circumstances, it's not something that just anybody could achieve. I don't think. There's something there, and it's as you mentioned, there's Mister and there's Curo Torres as well, who's playing, who he reunites with as well in the future. And it's I think when you look at it, Extremadura, Tenerife, and what comes next in such a short amount of time, and you think about what we have, what the impression a lot of people have of contemporary Rafa Benitez.
Yeah.
It's probably he's quite hard done to. He doesn't. Maybe we're probably going to end this thinking, is he one of the most disrespected managers of all time for the fact that he's underappreciated, I should say, in hindsight, because these are really, really impressive achievements in a really short space of time under difficult circumstances for somebody who is quite an inexperienced coach, because it's moved quick. I mean, obviously, from mid to late 80s, he was youth set up at Real Madrid, and that is in itself quite a, it's quite a silver spoon for starting your managerial career, isn't it? But to do it with limited resources in Extremadura and Tenerife, let's just take a second to appreciate that.
Yeah, small round of applause. I do like the term contemporary Rafa Benitez as well. I think that's how I might refer to him moving forward. Just contemporary Rafa Benitez just sat in the corner over there, and he was actually on a plane back from Madrid a couple of weeks ago. My friend saw him, and he just said he was the nicest bloke as well. Every guy on the plane was just getting up and going to the toilet just so they can have a word with Rafa and have a picture and things like that. And he said, honestly, he couldn't be any nicer, which again lends itself to the fact that so many people, for want of a better word, take the piss out of him, and it's so harsh because he's such a lovely person. So hopefully this podcast can bring around us to change that mindset about Rafa Benitez, because what you're about to hear next, Paul, I know you've read the agenda the same as me. This 3-season stint at Valencia is nothing short of miraculous. We've already set the picture that this is a club that looks like it's on a downward turn. They've sold their best players. They've lost the president who helped them get to 2 Champions League finals back to back and a Copa del Rey win. He goes in there. He's a very humble man on this. I think there's a quote from Canizares who said that, who am I to tell you how to play? You guys are, back-to-back Champions League finalists, and, I'm coming up from the Segunda. But if you give me a chance, I think I've got the tools to help you improve. And again, it goes back to he sets the tone from day one, doesn't he? And people buy into it, don't they?
Yeah. And, I think that speaks to what we've referenced already, the sort of person that he is, and how he articulates his perspective to people who maybe already have a preconceived impression of him because of his, maybe thinking back to back then when he still had a relatively full head of hair. He still had this kind of not an intimidating look to him as some coaches maybe do, and obviously coming from lesser teams, and I'm doing that in air quotes for the benefit of doubt, to go into what is a huge step up, really. We talked about what Valencia is like. It's a city that's got a lot. It's got a lot of wealth to it as well, and by all accounts, the fans are great when they're on side, but they are quite hard to win over, and they have high expectations. So to walk into that role with not chaos, but a heightened sense of expectation around you, and to win people over quickly is again another credit to him, I suppose, because it isn't an easy thing to do in the best of circumstances, and we've seen, in more recent years, other coaches go to Valencia and not be taken to or given anything like the chance in a shorter space of time as well.
No, I think that's it from a Rafa perspective. He, as you said, he's going into that cauldron where expectation is high anyway, and rightly or wrongly, people will go, well, we've been turned down by some really quality managers. We're hiring someone from the Segunda, which there's still taboo about that today, by the way. That's not something from back then. Bringing a manager up through the system is often seen as a bit of a gimme, whereas the rotation of those top managers in La Liga and the same in Segunda, you don't see a lot of movement in between them, do you? So he was out on a limb really from day one, wasn't he? But
yeah,
let's say it paid off ever so slightly, Paul, because how many years was it that Valencia hadn't won La Liga?
So is it 31? 31? Yeah.
Almost as old as us, Paul, isn't it?
Maybe imagine that.
Love to be 31 again. That'd be great. But yeah, he galvanizes this team. He doesn't really start off going to plan. To be fair, some of the football, he's not getting the results to go in there. But I think the most impressive thing is that the fans can see that he's trying to play a more attacking brand of football, something that they hadn't been used to under Hector Cooper beforehand.
Yeah, that's one of the key things, is that they'd been a team that had defensive solidity at the expense of, I'd say, enjoyable attacking football. But perhaps the word should be, effective. I mean, obviously they had some near misses in terms of achievements under Cooper, and obviously won the Copa under Ranieri before it. But the change in style wasn't something you could just do overnight, obviously. But I think the fans could notice that there was something different going on here. Let's give it a chance.
Yeah, and it's a big part of it that he's getting that chance, and again, not to steal a word from one of the previous managers, that tinkering that he did to try and find a formation which, gave him that solid base, that solidity in defense still, but basically let the players play, attack, and be creative. And a big part of that, which we'll talk about later, is this becoming part of the crushing machine, which is eventually what the term for this team came about, from the way they played football, because again it was something that was so different. But as we mentioned, he brought Mestalla across from Tenerife with him, again a player stepping up from Segunda into La Liga and doing really well. They won the league 7 points ahead of Depor again. It wasn't a particularly great season all around. You know, we maybe caveat that to say that isn't a complete loving, but
Well, yeah, let's be fair. So it wasn't a great season, but to finish 7 points ahead of Depor, 9 points clear of Madrid. I think Barca were in fourth, weren't they? I think it was 11 points behind. Barca were going through their own crisis at the time. Madrid, they were still the Galactico era. It was I'm trying to think now who they didn't have then. They had McManaman, Soldado, Roberto Carlos, Guti, Salades, Carranca, Zidane,
had they
Raul.
just signed Zidane? I was going to say Zidane had just come in at this point, hadn't he?
It was either that season or the season before, but they still had Makalele and Carranca, Santi Solari, Steve McManaman as well. Was that his first season?
Yeah. I'm seeing the kit. It's like it's the first Adidas kit, isn't it? That they had after Kelly.
That's the one, yeah. So I mean, all right, it's a team of Galacticos, but you're right. They had their own problems that season, so it's not a complete Rafa loving that by any stretch of the imagination. But let's say, we do need to recognise that to just finish ahead of Madrid or Barcelona in any season is an achievement, as Diego Simeone will tell you. But Depor at the time, this is where Depor were really hot. Was it? I'm trying to think now. What 2001 wasn't it? So Madrid had won it in 2000, and we're still in the midst of the Super Depor era, though, aren't we? So
I think Tristan was top goal scorer this season as well, wasn't he? So again, you look at that spine which Depor had got, and the success that they had throughout the 90s. Not only winning the Liga at points, but also their successes in the Champions Leagues and being regulars in there. And one of the players you would have seen in the rolling titles at the start. Rolling titles, bloody hell, that is nostalgic. Really show me in the rolling titles, children. There was children, sort of Valeron as well. Who was just such a wonderful player. So again, we spoke a lot before about how players were going to Italy, and that was a place to be. But La Liga was still a hotbed of talent and was very much in its emergence. And again, maybe I'm being harsh on this because it's not a point tally that he had compared to the one in the third season where he wins it, hands down. But still, to only lose 5 games all season, half as many Barcelona, Real Madrid, and Depor is impressive, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So it was, as you said there. So it was lose 5 games, draw 12, win 21, score 51 goals, concede just 27. And we talked a minute or two ago about the fact that he's come in, he's changed the style of football, but they are still solid at the back. It's just that I think what he's done there, he brings in a sense of game management that still allows them to try and create something, but it because he's got that defensive base already that he's potentially partially inherited. It does help, and it's just refinements in this first season until he gets up and running, and obviously we can talk about the crushing machine in a moment or two. But yeah, so to finish just losing five games, and the goal level, 51 goals. I'm sure there's about 7 or 8 teams that scored more than that than him. I think. Barca and Madrid were in the 60s, I think, weren't they? The 60 odd each. And Depor, obviously, to Tristan on his own, has got a third of what of that.
So 3 hat tricks that season as well. Something mad. He was just on wonders, Tristan, and I saw it at a charity game recently at Malaga, and he still got it. He scored in that one as well. It was chef's kiss nostalgia moment, but I
think what we can say, with that, and just to add a bit of a snippet that you can chuck out there is perhaps that season finishing above Depor was a bigger achievement than finishing above Madrid and Barcelona.
I'd go that'll be one for the people that like talking about Simeone now and what his achievements. These are the trendsetters first. Simeone didn't break the wheel. It was Valencia with Rafa and Depor as well. But obviously, the fact that he's managed to win that, get Champions League football again, which was quite important too. for Valencia in terms of keeping the momentum going, keeping expectations high. You mentioned before the fact that they didn't recruit well, or certainly didn't reinvest the money. There weren't three people that were going out the door, but I think they only managed to sign Anthony Revier in that second season for Rafa Benitez, and it wasn't what they wanted, was it?
No, and if I'm right in thinking, it wasn't a lot of money either, was it?
No,
I
I
think
think it was nominal fee.
the fee. Yeah, the season before, Misa had come on a free.
Was it
And then
Raffete from Malaga as well, wasn't it? That came in
yes,
for.
that was also for a free transfer.
I think that was for gratis as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
It's
a
it's
tough
not like
rebuild, isn't it? Oh no, in fact, you know what? Raffetti was. I think they might have paid a fee for him. Was that not? I might be getting him confused now, because you also had Gonzalo de los Santos. He cost a bit. I think he was also from Malaga. I'm sure they spent about 15 million on him. And Salva Ballesta from Atletico Madrid. Is that the second season now? I can't remember if that's the second season.
I think that might be, yeah. I think that's the way it went round, because I think Ballesta went from Malaga to Atleti and then to Valencia. Yeah, because I think again Ballesta was one of the top scorers in La Liga the season beforehand as well. So I think that's the way it went round the houses. But you can see that they're not, despite being champions, despite being in the Champions League, they're not picking up your Zidanes, they're not picking up your there's the same level of players which are being introduced here, there, and everywhere across Spain, and it kind of shows in the second season as well, doesn't it? The fact that they don't quite reach the heights. They finished just outside the Champions League places by a point, behind Celta Vigo, of all teams, in that wonderful Citron shirt as well. I've got in my brain.
Well, don't forget though, at that time, Celta, they definitely finished fourth in that second season, but I'm sure they finished fifth or sixth as well. They weren't, they weren't mugs, that team, and obviously they had a great kit to go with it. So, and that always helps. I think that's a good kit's worth an extra 3 points a season in my book, anyway.
Absolutely. You know what? That could be another podcast that we're doing. We can rank the teams, and we can build a La Liga table out of best kits. That would be quite good. They to be honest, again, I don't give them credit here, because I say they got knocked out of the Champions League. They did get knocked out in the quarterfinals. It took ironically to Inter Milan of all teams. But in that year, and this kids is going back when the Champions League had 2 group stages. So you had your first group stage and then your second group stage, and then you were into the knockouts. So I think they had relegated Liverpool to the UEFA Cup, which I think they then went on and won, or I think it was around that time. And then they also knocked out Arsenal. So again, Arsene Wenger's all-conquering Premier League winning Arsenal were put to the sword as well. So, it wasn't a bad campaign in the Champions League. But again, I just think when you look at where they finished in the league, the fact that they didn't win silverware that year, Rafa probably looked at that as a bit of a disappointment, didn't he? But unlike his usual stance when it goes backwards, where he's then gone, well, I'll tell you what, I'll resign or I'll move on. He stuck with it and decided to go again, probably for the first time in his career, didn't he?
Yeah. Which, again, I think that tells you that he could sense something, a unique opportunity at Valencia to do something different. And you look at it, and let's just think about what Valencia is like. You go to Mestalla, and obviously you've been in the last 7 days, so you'll be able to explain better than me. But it's one of those stadiums where it's got the high pitched seating, or the tiers in it. It's the buildings around it. The streets are close. There's flags draped around it. Before a game, there's a buzz about it. Inside the stadium, it's lively. There's an intense, not pressure cooker atmosphere, but there is an atmosphere. And this is a time when the fans had very high expectations. I think there's something captivating about it, and you see pictures from the era as well. You can sort of, through the image, you can get a feel like for the the sea of orange and the heat, and there's just something special about it. And I don't think Mestalla's lost that in any stretch of the imagination. You know, it still appears that way and everything. But I don't know if this is another tangent. I don't know if maybe just the clinical picture that you get when you watch football nowadays in this ultra high definition era, it misses a bit of that sort of gloss that you got in the early 2000s, where like it kind of, there was like not like a haze, but there was kind of just that fuzz across the screen that made it look all that more intense. You know, it had that extra sort of glitter to it.
Yeah, sort of like it had Channel 5 syndrome, didn't it? Where it just had that like little graininess to it. And I just think, you know, when you were watching football there, and as you said, that, you know, you didn't have as many cameras as well. I did notice at Mestalla this week there was a spider cam going around, which I thought was cool, but I also found pretty annoying. That was like ruining my view, but once it blended into the crowd, it wasn't too bad. And yeah, I think for Rafa here, he's just gone, I can do this again. I can galvanize his team again. You know, we've taken a bit of a knock. So what? I've got the tools to make you better. And dear God, did he make that come true?
Yeah, you'd be sold on it. You'd want to give it another go. But I mean, you've just won. You know, you've walked into this job in your first season. You've overcome the odds. You felt your proof point. The second season, I mean, everybody's heard of second season syndrome, haven't they?
Yeah,
you know, like a difficult second album. It's one of those things that you've just got to get over and done with and go for, you know, a third one. And yeah, it's one of them.
Yeah, it was built at a canter as well, and like you say, you know, the not only did they go on to regain the La Liga title, by some margin as well. They won the UEFA Cup, so again, we didn't finish inside the Champions League qualification the season before. But I'd tell you what, next best job, go and win the UEFA Cup. That's Champions League qualification and some. They beat Barcelona to the title by 2 points, and again, this is when the Barcelona trains, you know, they're coming out of that era of problematic issues, and coming into that sort of like beginning of the golden era for them. Most wins 23, only 7 losses that season as well. Most goals scored 71, which in a 38 game season is just absolutely mad numbers. Fewest conceded. Massive away wins. Unfortunately, I had to say this, Paul. There was 2 huge away wins at Mallorca and at Malaga, where they beat both of them away by 5 goals.
We can both retrospectively suffer that pain now, can't we?
we can shake our fist and go, you didn't have to do us like that, Rafa. You know, it's like that Simpsons meme where it's like, stop, he's already dead. We were away with it. And again, to just go back to the kit thing, doing it all in this most resplendent black and white Nike kit, Toyota across the badge. Absolutely brilliant, and what a great season! This for me was one of the seasons that really kicked off Spanish football as a global product, as a big one, because not only did you have the teams that are competing at the top there, but I'll read you out the Pichichi Trophy run this season. You had Ronaldo, you know, original R9 with 24 goals for Real Madrid. Julio Baptista at Sevilla, 20 goals. Mister Raul Tamudo for Espanyol. Fernando Torres, who just burst onto the scene for Atletico Madrid. Samuel Eto'o for Mallorca, and David Villa for Real Zaragoza. You know, this is everything this podcast is going to be built upon, Paul.
Yeah, just those names are enough to make me think. Yeah, that, you know, there's so much that we need to talk about on this podcast going forward as well. But yeah, I'm going to just think back to what we were saying before about Italia 90. The Football Italia and how that was bringing in a cool culture around the place. For me, this point in time now, where you've had the Galacticos have become a thing that people outside of Spain know about at this point. Obviously, David Beckham's at Real Madrid at this point. You've got Rafa's Valencia doing this the way they've done it in this season. I think this is where La Liga is set up for the next 10, 15 years as being the coolest league in Europe, to be fair.
Yeah.
Premier League ignored it. I know there's a lot of Premier League fans and everything like that. And we're both English, so we do have English teams, but this is about Spanish football. And I think this is the sort of the, I mean, some people might argue it was when Depor have that moment, but I think it's this season where Rafa's Valencia achieved not just a League one, but a League and European Cup, a UEFA Cup double.
Yeah,
that I think that people really started to take a keen interest in League, and you just named all those players there that are in the high scoring list, and they're all, with the exception of maybe one or two, respectfully, they're all huge names that not only have great club careers but have great Champions League careers or great international careers. And David Villa, San Mileto, Fernando Torres, Ronaldo, Julio Baptista, household names, and they're all in the Spanish league. This is what sets the league up as the next 10 years of just being the best to watch.
It is, and I think it's that exciting time. And again, you're probably right. This is when it becomes a much more accessible commodity as well. You've got Sky TV kicking off, and as we've mentioned, we've got Guillem Balaguer and his friends and Revista de la Liga. You get in Champions League football on terrestrial telly, ITV. Not even one back then, just ITV, just Channel 3. And you were seeing this a lot more and being able to admire the product a lot more, and that's when you then start to see the flood of especially Spanish footballers onto the European continent and more permanently into English football as well. And Rafa was the first man out the door really when it comes to that, because of these achievements. He did it through a very unique method, and we've spoken about this talent that he had for playing tactically. And this crushing machine, as it was aptly named, was all about playing high intensity football built on a solid defensive organization, hitting balls into the channels, which just completely destroyed the analogy of playing 4-4-2 and kicking up to the big lad. It changed the game really, didn't it?
That's the thing, yeah. So it's with the ball, or on paper it's a 4-2-3-1, but then without the ball they go to two tight banks of four. The crushing aspect comes into it as you are forcing the opponents wide. The high press comes from the striker, and then whoever's playing just behind the striker. Usually it was Aymar, I think, in the early years. Yeah. Those two will either press the opposing centre halves, forcing them to play to the fullback, at which point the fullback has to either go down the line because the midfield is now being compacted. And if they want to play a ball inside, this is where the crushing comes in. They get closed from the Valencia wingers and running, central midfielders that compact it. It's kind of the opposite of what Guardiola's Barcelona and later City and Bayern teams do, where they always in possession would create the triangles. Well, Rafa's Valencia were creating the triangles with the press, so you didn't have anywhere to pass it. It's the invert of a Guardiola type system, and that's where the crushing aspect comes. So you've either got to go out wide, and we'll force you to put it out of into the crowd or out for a throw in or whatever, or if you want to play it inside, we'll crush you that way.
And it's just that it's that ability that they didn't let teams breathe. And we spoke about it is a machine in every sense of the word as well, because as we spoke about Paco's influence in this, the fitness of the players was 10 times more, and as they went through the season, instead of waning, they somehow got stronger. But it's also that aspect of being cogs in a machine. You're not just an 11 out there. You've got 5 players on the bench, 3 at which the time you could use, and you would be putting them to good effect. You weren't just bringing somebody off because they were tiring or because they weren't playing well. You were replacing them with another cog, which they can then keep this machine going and keep that press going. And the more they got into the seasons, the more they would win the ball higher up, and therefore creating better chances to score and score more goals as well, which is just. Again, we'd speak about that now, and if we talk about it, we'd say, that's what, Jurgen Klopp or Arne Slot or anyone like that does. Benitez was doing it, 25 years ago and sort of like set the tone on that. And, a big part of that was his ability to inspire the players, but it was also the players that he had. We spoke about Aymar, and what a wonderful, talented footballer he was, to not only be that man who can sort of like hit the channels and to be able to provide that killer pass, but his energy to buzz about and be strong and dispossess players high up was incredible. You look at that solidity of Pellegrino and Roberto Ayala. He inherited those players, but I tell you what, he made them two of the best defenders in the world at the time, didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in interviews that Rafa's done in the years gone by, looking back on that season, he's quite open about the fact that not in a disrespectful way, he says like, we had talented players, but we also had players who were not standout talents in one position, but were standout footballers that understood how they fit in to the system that we were playing. And without those players, the ones who had the extra edge in their own position couldn't do what they did. It is cogs in a big machine that everybody needs to buy into.
Yeah, you're talking your Barrages and your Albeidas, very, very talented football players, but they'll never be the ones that you immediately go out and think of when you think of this team, unlike your Aymars or even for me, your Vicente. He again probably gets lost in the noise a bit around this age because the emergence of the winger as a role, he's very much dominated in this area by the likes of your Ryan Giggs, your Nedved, your latterly your Ronaldinho's and such. But for me, he was up there, as some of one of the best in the world at doing this, and not just being able to be a brilliant attacking outlet, but also again similar to Aymar, defensively really solid, really strong, and very reliable, wasn't he?
Yeah, it was two things. It was having an intensity and a tenacity, as well as having skill on the ball. You needed to have those other aspects of your game to be successful in this team, and he had it in abundance.
I was thinking before, I was like, I'm fairly certain he was Valencia all the way in a one-man club, but then I remember that he ended up at Brighton, didn't he?
Was it Brighton? I knew it was. I thought I didn't know it was Southampton. I know you shouldn't really get them two teams confused, but yeah, I think it was the guy that beat Southampton. Yeah. That's like when anybody from London says, "Oh, up north," and it's like the north's quite a big place.
Yeah, anywhere past Watford Gap.
Yeah.
Cover it for anyone in London, but we'll have to have a look back on that one and see where he did end up. Because again, I remember it being like, my God, he's ended up there. But similarly as well, the one last player I probably want to give a bit of love to, and he was a good cog in this machine, but he was never the name again you remember. But it actually shocked me again to remember that he played at Valencia at this time. Big John Carew. What a footballer!
Yes. Yeah. Norwegian centre forward, wasn't he? Yeah. And then I think as well that he was a different John Carew to the one that was maybe at Aston Villa, not just in terms of performance quality, but just the actual approach to the game. Because he was a unit, wasn't he? He was big. But I think I seem to remember in Valencia days that he was a lot more mobile than he was in his later years as well. But I know that's quite a typical and cliched thing to say of a centre forward, but yeah. Who here hasn't got slower in age?
Yeah, well, but and I tend to remember him more from his time at Lyon as well, where in again Champions League accessibility and thinking, right, well, who is Gregory Cooper knocking it long to? Oh, it's John Carew again, perfect. But it surprised me again to see that he was in this squad, and again, very much part of the machine we were discussing. But again, after all that success, though, Paul, things can turn sour, unfortunately. And the story of Rafa's revolution at the Mestalla does end there. He falls out with Jesus Garcia about basically who should be signing the players. And I think this was a big thing about him going to Liverpool, as well as that he was in control of signing players at Anfield for a very long time. He wanted to build a squad to go again. I've got to do better this time. So I assume he was thinking, I've got to win the Champions League and retain the La Liga title this time. He was quoted as saying, I was hoping for a sofa and they bought me a lamp, when he was talking about Valencia signing Fabian Cannavaro. And bit harsh on Fabio, if I'm being perfectly honest, but you can see what he was talking about, can't you?
You can, yeah. I don't think anybody has anybody ever asked Fabio what he felt about that ever since. Because no, it is a great quote, right? And obviously, we're here to talk about Benitez's time at Valencia, but it has dawned on me, I don't think I've ever heard what Fabian thinks of that, really. So
The other side of the story is on that.
yeah.
Side of
It is illustrative, though, isn't it, of a breakdown in relationship for him to have felt comfortable saying that out loud as well. So it shows you where where his mind had got to at that point at his tenure with Valencia. Because you're right, that is. How do you walk into a dressing room and try and get the best out of players if you've openly said something like that to them? So it really is it's time to go moment then.
Nailing the coffin stuff, isn't it? And I think, if I remember rightly, he wanted a defender. God knows why, because he had Pellegrino and Ayala, which were brilliant. But again, maybe
we haven't even mentioned Pellegrino, actually, have we? That's or Carlos Marchena, who we got on a free from Benfica.
Exactly. And again, these are just wonderful players, which they just come to the front of your mind, don't they? And go, it's very much sitting in a pub with the lads and going, do you remember such and such a player?
Yeah.
Or, pub quiz questions that you do with your mates. And these are the ones that will always crop up. And, again, it was obviously a sad end to him, but maybe again, he thought, I'm at the end now. I've done what I can. I've tried pushing for a bit more finance, a bit more opportunity to sign the players that I want. I'm not getting it here. I'm going to go find it elsewhere. And as we mentioned before, he becomes the first Spanish football manager in English football, taking over after Gerard Houllier had left Liverpool as well. And as we say, the rest is history for Rafa on that front in English football. Still lives in Merseyside as well, if I remember rightly.
Does he?
On the Wirral. I don't think his family has ever moved from his time at when he was at Liverpool. And even when he was at Newcastle, he would commute up to the northeast, or when he was down at Chelsea, he'd hop on a train at Lime Street and go down there. So very much enamoured with Merseyside, which may be hard for you to hear, Paul, after all that Rafa living. I suppose what we can talk about in terms of his lasting impression is that, as we mentioned before, it didn't really just stop for Valencia at Rafa. They did have waning success towards the end of it, but they also had this conveyor belt of footballers that came out afterwards. And, they did make some pretty decent signings. One of my favourite footballers ever, Fernando Morientes, he ended up at Valencia after Rafa had left. And, then we look at David Villa, who we've mentioned, he ended up there, and David Silva eventually too. So,
at one point, you're talking, and this is another podcast really in its own, but look at the Valencia squad, 2008, 2009, or even between 2006 and 2009, because they don't forget they go to Chelsea in the Champions League with a team that has Silva, Mata, Villa, with Harkin and and there was another. It was the ball-winning centre half that they had as well. That used to play just behind.
Barajan as well at that point, didn't they? He was there.
And just an incredible, and so yes, it's peaks and troughs, isn't it? I think, but I mean that in a conveyor belt sense, from one league winning team to one that perhaps, if those players, particularly Mata and Silva, had just stayed a little bit longer, who knows where they would have got to. But obviously Mata goes to Chelsea, Silva comes to City, Villa goes to Barcelona.
Yeah, and sort of the beginning of the end maybe for Valencia as a force in Spanish football, and we as we see them now, they're battling against relegation. Carlos Corberan, who is Valencia through and through, doing his very best in very trying circumstances at the minute as well. So a shame to see, and I do generally mean this, as much as I would love to see Malaga play their next season in the Segunda, knocking on wood that Malaga stay in the Segunda. I couldn't imagine a La Liga without Valencia in it, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Yeah, it does seem like no club's ever too big to go down, but it does feel like if Valencia went down, it would be a wake up call that it could happen to anyone really, because they're an institution. That somebody who for all of my time of being really passionate about Spanish football. They've always been a big club they've been like, part of the furniture. So, but it's I mean, we can't go on another tangent, but it's the Peter Lim dynasty, isn't it, of destroying a football club. So
I know. I was reading today as well that if it wasn't Valencia, he almost bought Daypor, and I think he said he was in for Liverpool as well. So again, it's one of them where you just think, just sell up and just let somebody else have a go, because there's no two ways about it. Valencia's best days aren't necessarily behind them. They could be in front of them as well, because they are still, as you said, a force, an institution, and a wonderful place to go visit. And I would recommend anyone to get to Mestalla whilst you can, because it is a brilliant place to go.
It's a bucket list thing, and I've not yet made it there, but I'm hoping to. So we'll see.
Maybe we'll do an El Partido at the game, Paul, and we'll find a thing. I found a great route to go to. If you fly to Alicante and then drive to Valencia because you booked your mate the wrong train ticket, then it works out quite well. A bit expensive, but worth it, which wasn't too bad. But I suppose you best leave it there, Paul. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you about Rafa's revolution at Mestalla. Nice to get nostalgic on a Thursday evening as well, and hopefully many more episodes to come too as well.
Absolutely, Nick. Been a pleasure.
And no problem at all. If you want to learn more about El Partido and what we do, we're not just a nostalgia podcast. We also have El Pozo, as I mentioned before, home of anything which is Primera Ref. Third tier of Spanish football, which is a bit more unknown, but there's still some very interesting stories down there. It's called El Pozo because the third tier and beyond is called the Well in Spain, which is, again, a story in itself for another week. And as well, there's so many other, brilliant Spanish football podcasts you can go and listen to, TSFP, Spanish Segunda, Giricast, whatever it might be. Paul, Over the Bar, obviously still going strong every single day as well. With all their content, that's always brilliant to go visit too.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, they're still pumping out things on the Bundesliga, English football, match day vlogs, ground hopping stuff, you name it. It's a good time to be a football fan, isn't it? Really, there's so many options out there.
It is. Never has it been so good. But if you want your little piece of Spanish football nostalgia / history / kit loving / John Carew, then come to El Partido this time next week and we'll be back again. Thank you very much for listening. Hasta luego, and we'll see you soon. Vamos.